The hum of the industrial air conditioner is the only thing that reminds me I am still alive. A low-frequency vibration that rattles the marrow of my bones while I stare through the thick, reinforced glass of my cage. They call this the observation suite, but to anyone with a lick of sense, it is a high-tech death cell designed to strip away every shred of a human being's privacy before the end finally comes. I am sitting on a cold, bolted-down steel bench, my reflection ghosting back at me in the polished surface of the transparent walls that separate my small, sterile world from the darkened corridor outside. Every few minutes, a red status light flickers on the ceiling, casting a bloody hue over the white floor tiles and making me wonder if this is the moment the door finally slides open for the last time. I was brought here under the guise of a medical evaluation, a simple series of tests for a persistent migraine that turned into a nightmare of paperwork and forced sedation. When I finally regained consciousness, the hospital gown I was wearing felt like a shroud, and the man standing on the other side of the glass was not the neurologist I had met in the bright, busy lobby downstairs. Dr. Eris Thorne stands there now, his white coat pristine and his eyes hidden behind thin, wire-rimmed spectacles that reflect the sterile glow of his tablet. He does not look like a killer. He looks like a man balancing a checkbook or grading a term paper, which makes the calculated cruelty of this confinement so much harder to swallow. He taps a stylus against the glass, the sound sharp and echoing like a gunshot in the silent room, and I feel a surge of adrenaline that makes my fingertips itch with the urge to strike back. The human spirit is a fascinating thing to observe when it is backed into a corner with no hope of escape. Thorne says, his voice piped in through a small, high-fidelity speaker hidden in the corner of the ceiling. You are currently breathing a specialized mix of enriched oxygen, but in exactly 1 hour, the scrubbers will shut down and the CO2 levels will begin to climb until your consciousness simply fades into a permanent sleep. I stand up, my legs feeling heavy and leaden, and I press my palms against the glass, searching for a seam, a hinge, or a flaw that I can exploit with my bare hands. The glass is cool to the touch and unervingly solid, a barrier that feels miles thick even though I can see the dust motes dancing in the air just inches away from my face. I want to scream, to pound on the transparent walls until my knuckles bleed, but I know that is exactly the kind of data he is looking for to complete his twisted research. As the night deepens, the lights in the outer hallway dim, leaving me in a pool of artificial radiance that feels like a target painted on the floor. I begin to pace the small square of my cell, counting the steps, trying to keep my mind sharp and my heart rate under control despite the crushing weight of the situation. How did a man like this gain control of a facility like this? And how many others have sat on this very bench, watching that same red light flicker while their time slowly evaporated into the vents? The intrigue of his operation is matched only by the sheer coldness of his execution, and I realize that the only way out is to stop being a passive subject and start being a variable he did not account for. I look at the vent high up on the wall, the slats narrow and reinforced, and then I look at the heavy metal bed frame that is welded to the floor near the corner of the room. The air is already starting to feel different, a subtle thickness that makes every breath feel like I am inhaling lukewarm water instead of life-giving oxygen. I can see Thorne watching his monitors, his brow furrowed as if he is disappointed that I am not weeping or begging for my life yet. You are remarkably stoic, which is a rare trait in the final stages of the experiment, he muses, his voice crackling slightly through the speaker as if the connection is straining under the tension. I ignore him and focus on the base of the bed frame, noticing a small patch of rust where the cleaning chemicals have pooled over the years, eating away at the integrity of the weld. It is a tiny weakness, a microscopic fracture in his perfect system, but it is the only weapon I have in this glass-walled tomb. I sit back down on the bench, feigning a sudden bout of dizziness, letting my head hang low between my knees so he thinks the gas is already taking hold of my nervous system. I watch him through my peripheral vision, seeing him lean closer to the glass, his curiosity piqued by my sudden collapse. If I can draw him into the room, or at least get him to open the pressurized seal of the door to check his specimen, I might have one chance to turn the tables. The silence is absolute now, a vacuum of sound that makes the ticking of my own pulse feel like a drumbeat in the dark. I wait, holding my breath until my lungs burn, forcing my body to remain perfectly still even as my mind screams at me to run, to fight, to survive at any cost. Thorn stands up, his shadow stretching long and thin across the corridor floor as he approaches the keypad next to the heavy sliding door. I hear the soft chime of the electronic lock, a sound that feels like a choir of angels compared to the suffocating quiet of the last few hours. The door hisses, the pressure equalizing with a sharp pop, and I feel a rush of stale, hallway air hitting my face like a physical blow. He steps inside, a clipboard in one hand and a small medical sensor in the other, his confidence blinding him to the fact that a cornered animal is never truly defeated until its heart stops beating. I wait until he is within arm's reach, until I can smell the faint scent of peppermint on his breath, and then I move with a speed I didn't know I possessed. I don't go for his throat. Instead, I dive for the heavy medical cart he left just outside the door, grabbing the heavy oxygen canister that sits on the bottom shelf. He shouts, a high-pitched sound of genuine surprise, but I am already swinging the heavy metal cylinder with every ounce of strength I have left. The impact against the edge of the glass wall is deafening, a crystalline explosion that sends shards of reinforced safety glass flying through the air like diamonds. The structural integrity of the observation suite fails in a spectacular cascade of noise and light, and suddenly the barrier between life and death is gone. I don't look back to see if he is injured. I simply scramble through the jagged hole, my feet hitting the linoleum of the hallway with a thud that sounds like freedom. I run through the darkened corridors, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I follow the red exit signs toward the surface. Behind me, I hear the distant sound of alarms beginning to wail, a mechanical scream that signals the end of his little experiment. I burst through the final set of double doors and into the cool, night air, the smell of rain and wet asphalt filling my lungs with the sweetest sensation I have ever known. I am miles away from safety, and I know that a man like Thorn has resources, but as I disappear into the shadows of the city, I know one thing for certain. I was supposed to be a recorded memory in a death cell, but instead, I am a living witness to a nightmare that is far from over. The metal walls of this walk-in freezer are not just barriers. They are a frozen countdown clock that is slowly pulling the heat from my blood and turning my every breath into a thick, white ghost. I am trapped inside a stainless steel tomb at the back of a roadside diner that has been closed for the season. And the only person who knows I am here is the man who slid the heavy exterior bolt into place with a hollow, metallic thud. Through the small, frosted porthole window in the door, I can see the silhouette of a drifter sitting at the counter in the darkened dining room, calmly eating a slice of pie while he waits for the temperature in here to finish me off. He doesn't want my money or my car. He wants to watch the life fade out of a human being through a pane of glass, treating my struggle like a silent movie played out in a theater of ice. I remember the way he looked when I pulled over to help him on the side of the highway, a quiet man with a worn rucksack and eyes that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. I thought I was doing a good deed, offering a ride and a warm meal in exchange for a bit of conversation to keep me awake during the long midnight haul across the state. But as soon as we stepped into this abandoned kitchen to scavenge for some supplies, his demeanor shifted from grateful traveler to calculated predator in a heartbeat. He didn't use a gun or a knife. He simply used my own momentum against me, shoving me into the cold storage unit and slamming the door before I could even register the betrayal. Now, the thermometer on the interior wall reads exactly 10 degrees, and I can feel the shivers starting to turn into deep, uncontrollable tremors that rack my entire frame. The air in here is so dry it hurts to swallow, and every surface I touch feels like it wants to peel the skin right off my fingertips. I am surrounded by crates of frozen vegetables and vacuum-sealed meats that have become as hard as granite, mocking me with their permanence while I slowly break down. Why did he choose me? And how many times has he done this before in the quiet corners of the country where people simply disappear without a trace? I scream until my throat feels like it is lined with broken glass, but the insulation in these walls is designed to keep everything contained, including the sound of a man begging for his life. The drifter doesn't even look up from his plate. He just checks his watch and adjusts the volume on a small transistor radio he placed on the counter, the faint sound of a jazz station drifting through the vents like a cruel joke. I have to move, I have to keep my blood flowing, but the space is so cramped that I can only pace 3 steps in any direction before hitting a shelf or a wall. I begin to look for a way out, my eyes darting over the rivets and the seams of the industrial unit, looking for any mechanical oversight that could be my salvation. There is an emergency release handle, a glowing plastic knob that is supposed to open the door from the inside, but when I pull it, it moves with a sickening limpness. He must have unscrewed the internal mechanism from the outside before he trapped me, leaving the safety feature as nothing more than a taunting piece of useless plastic. The realization that the primary exit is dead makes my heart race, a frantic pounding against my ribs that is the only source of warmth I have left in this sub-zero cell. The light inside the freezer is a single, flickering fluorescent bulb that hums with a low-frequency buzz, making the frost on the walls look like a jagged landscape of diamonds. I look at the crates again, my mind racing through every survival tip I have ever heard, trying to find a way to generate heat or create a tool. I find a stack of heavy-duty plastic salt bags used for the industrial water softener, and I begin to pile them against the door to create a small pocket of insulation. If I can't get out, I have to slow down the cooling process, but the salt is cold, so cold it feels like I am hugging blocks of dry ice. My toes are starting to go numb, a terrifying sensation that feels like my feet are simply dissolving into the floor, and I know that I am entering the first stages of hypothermia. Outside, the drifter finally stands up and walks toward the freezer door, his face appearing in the small window, framed by the frost like a portrait of a ghost. He taps on the glass with a silver coin, a rhythmic tink-tink-tink that vibrates through the metal and into my skull. "It won't be long now," he says, his voice muffled but clear enough to send a fresh wave of terror through my chest. The body is a remarkable machine, but it wasn't built for the Arctic, and eventually, your heart will just decide it's too tired to keep fighting the chill. He smiles, a thin, joyless expression that tells me he has watched this process many times, and then he turns off the kitchen lights, leaving me in total darkness except for the dying flicker of my own internal light. I am alone in the blackness, the silence so profound that I can hear the sound of the refrigerant moving through the pipes like a snake slithering behind the walls. I feel a sudden surge of anger, a hot, white-hot spark of defiance that cuts through the numbing fog in my brain. I am not going to die as a data point in his twisted game, and I am not going to let this freezer be my final resting place. I reach out in the dark, feeling for the heavy metal shelving units, and I find a loose bolt that has been vibrating in its socket for years. I twist it with my frozen fingers, ignoring the pain as the skin tears until the long, sharpened piece of steel comes free in my hand. It isn't a key, but it is a lever, and I know that even the strongest door has a hinge that can be compromised if enough pressure is applied to the right spot. I crawl toward the floor where the door meets the frame, and I begin to jam the bolt into the gap, using my body weight to force the metal deeper into the crevice. The cold is making my muscles stiff, but the adrenaline is acting like a fuel, pushing me to move faster than I ever thought possible. I hear a groan of protesting metal, a sound that gives me more hope than any prayer, and I redouble my efforts, throwing my entire shoulder against the bolt. Suddenly, there is a loud, snapping sound that echoes like a firecracker in the small space, and the bottom hinge of the freezer door buckles outward by a fraction of an inch. It isn't much, but it's enough to break the vacuum seal, and I can hear the hiss of the warmer air from the kitchen being sucked into the unit. I put my fingers into the gap, ignoring the sharp edges of the broken metal, and I pull with a strength born of pure desperation. The door resists for a heartbeat, then gives way with a screeching scream of tortured steel, swinging open just enough for me to tumble out onto the greasy kitchen floor. I don't wait to see where the drifter is. I just scramble to my feet, my legs shaking so hard I can barely stand, and I grab a heavy cast iron skillet from the stovetop. I see him standing by the window, his back to me as he watches the empty highway, and I don't give him a chance to turn around. I strike with everything I have, the heavy metal connecting with a thud that ends the nightmare once and for all. I collapse against the counter, the warmth of the room feeling like a physical embrace, and as I listen to the distant sound of a passing truck, I realize that the death cell was just a box, and I was the only thing inside it that refused to stay frozen. The air inside the security booth is thick with the smell of stale coffee and the hum of 13 flickering monitors, each one showing a different angle of the rusted, skeletal remains of the Blackwood Industrial Park. It is 2 in the morning, the graveyard shift of a 12-hour stretch, and the silence of the surrounding 500 acres feels like a physical weight pressing against the bulletproof glass of my tiny station. I am supposed to be safe in here, inside the steel-reinforced death cell of a booth, but as I watch a shadow detach itself from the side of Warehouse 4, I realize that the locks are only meant to keep people out, not to keep me alive. My hand trembles as I reach for the radio, the plastic casing cold against my palm, and I thumb the talk button to reach my partner, Elias, who is supposed to be patrolling the north perimeter in the truck. Elias, I've got movement on camera 9, near the old loading docks. Do you copy? I ask, my voice sounding thin and brittle in the cramped space of the booth. There is nothing but static for a long, agonizing 5 seconds, a white noise that seems to grow louder until a voice finally breaks through the hiss. I see him, Marcus, just a stray dog or maybe a drifter looking for copper wire. Stay put and keep the doors cycled. The voice replies, but something about the cadence is wrong. A slight mechanical edge that makes the hair on my arms stand up. Elias has a thick, gravelly accent from 30 years of smoking, but this voice is smooth, almost melodic, and it sounds like it is coming from someone who is smiling while they speak. I lean closer to the monitor, squinting at the grainy black and white feed, and I realize the shadow isn't a dog. It is a man in a tactical vest, and he is looking directly into the lens of the camera. I try the radio again, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs that feels like a bird trapped in a cage. Elias, that's not a drifter, he's got gear, and he's looking right at me. Respond immediately or I'm calling the county sheriff. Silence follows, a heavy, suffocating silence that lasts long enough for me to see the feed on camera 9 go black, replaced by a wall of digital snow. Then, the radio crackles to life again. But this time there is no voice, only the sound of someone whistling a slow, distorted tune that I recognize from a childhood nursery rhyme. I look at the main control panel and notice a small red light blinking that I have never seen before, a light that indicates the external power lines have been physically severed. The booth is running on a backup battery now, a ticking clock that will eventually leave me in total darkness in the middle of a wasteland. I realize then that I am being hunted by professionals who have turned my place of work into a slaughterhouse, and they have already taken out my only lifeline. Why would anyone target a bankrupt industrial park unless they weren't after the property, but the person sitting inside the cage? I begin to check the secondary locks, my fingers fumbling with the heavy iron bolts that secure the door to the reinforced frame. Through the window, I see 3 more figures emerging from the fog that rolls off the nearby river, their movements synchronized and silent as they fan out to surround the booth. They aren't carrying crowbars or hammers. They are carrying specialized tools designed to peel back metal like an orange skin, and they are moving with a terrifying lack of urgency. Who are you and what do you want? I yell through the intercom, my voice cracking with a mixture of rage and pure, unadulterated terror. The whistling on the radio stops, replaced by the same smooth voice from before. Only this time it sounds like it is right outside the door. We are the cleaning crew, Marcus, and you are a loose end that has stayed on the payroll for far too long. So why don't you make this easy and cycle the locks yourself? I back away from the glass, my mind racing through every exit strategy one have ever rehearsed. But there is only one way in and one way out of this booth. The windows are rated for high-impact rounds, but the door hinges are the weak point, a design flaw I noticed months ago and mentioned in a report that was clearly ignored. The night air is freezing, but I am drenched in a cold sweat that makes my uniform cling to my back like a second skin. I watch as one of the men attaches a hydraulic spreader to the door frame, the metal beginning to groan under a pressure that no human could ever resist. The sound of the steel protesting is a long, low scream that echoes my own internal panic, a screech of death cell reality that tells me I have less than 2 minutes before the seal is broken. I look around the booth, searching for anything I can use as a weapon, but all I have is a heavy flashlight, a canister of industrial-grade pepper spray, and a flare gun kept in the emergency kit for signaling rescue. It is a pathetic arsenal against 4 armed men, but it is all that stands between me and a shallow grave in the woods. The power flickers, the monitors blinking out one by one as the backup battery finally begins to fail under the strain of the security system. In the dim, red emergency light, the booth looks like a scene from a nightmare, the shadows of the men outside stretching across the floor like the fingers of a giant. I realize that if I stay in here, I am just waiting to be executed, but if I go out there, I might have a fraction of a percent of a chance to vanish into the industrial maze. I grab the flare gun and the pepper spray, my breath coming in short, jagged bursts that fog up the glass in front of me. I wait until the door hinge reaches its breaking point, the metal snapping with a sound like a lightning strike, and the door begins to sag outward. This is the moment where the hunter becomes the prey, and I refuse to be the victim in their twisted little game. As the door is wrenched open by the hydraulic tool, I don't wait for them to reach in. I kick the door with everything I have, using the weight of the steel to knock the lead man backward into the gravel. Before his companions can react, I fire the flare gun directly into the dry brush and debris piled near the warehouse entrance, creating a sudden, blinding wall of magnesium fire and thick smoke. The brightness is disorienting, a white-hot sun blooming in the middle of the midnight forest, and I use the chaos to sprint toward the shadows of the old refinery. My lungs burn with the cold air, and my legs feel like lead, but the adrenaline is a powerful drug that keeps me moving through the darkness. I hear them shouting behind me, their professional calm finally shattered by the unexpected resistance of a man who was supposed to be easy prey. I know this park better than they do. I know the hidden crawl spaces under the loading docks and the sections of fence that are loose enough to slip through. I dive into a concrete drainage pipe that leads toward the river, the smell of mud and stagnant water filling my nose as I crawl deeper into the earth. I wait there, my heart still hammering, listening to the sound of their boots crunching on the gravel above me until the noise fades into the distance. I have escaped the booth. I have escaped the death cell. And as the first light of dawn begins to gray the horizon, I know that I am the only one who will be telling this story to the police.